Welcome to the Faithful Fireside podcast.
The healing serpent, Moses raising up the bronze serpent is the biblical image, but that medical symbol actually comes out, and you see it in the rod of Asclepius, and then the Caduceus, which has like two serpents and wings. So you got the serpent, the staff, and the wings, and they're all associated with healing. So you'll see like Caduceus and Asclepius in the context of like hospitals will use that imagery.
Right, it's still used, right?
Yeah, still used. And so
Is that where it comes from?
So, well, it comes from, I think Asclepius might be Roman.
Okay.
And then Caduceus might be Greek. I forget exactly which one of those is which, but they're basically the same image, right? And the bronze serpent in the desert would be older, right? The Moses image. So the age is kind of, this is my same sort of thing when we start talking about like heaven, hell, Sheol. Not heaven and hell, but like hell, Sheol, Hades, they're all the same thing. They're the underworld, right? Now, there's a certain sense in which the hell sort of evolves where, Christ comes and harrows hell, setting the captives free kind of a thing. And then there is like a lake of fire image. Like there's sort of an image in Revelation that might say that there's like an evolution of this idea that's kind of the specific end times hell that's not so much the underworld that people go to or experience right now. You could make an argument that those things are distinct, that Hades and hell are not the same thing. But in the sense that all of those are words for the underworld, they are. That same kind of idea can be applied here with the image of these dragons and these serpents. Is like there's different ages that, maybe this one was used first, but we're all using symbols to talk about this same thing as the healing snake.
Okay.
And that goes back to that ambivalence. It's interesting. It's deadly venom or it's healing. And the idea is it submitted and rightly ordered to God? Or is it some sort of a chaos beast, right? Is it allowing the proper flow across its thresholds, or is it not? And that kind of determines whether it's a positive or negative symbol.
Yeah.
Okay. So that gets us to the end of what I wanted to kind of talk about for the first part. So you can have kind of like this discomfort of the symbol and the ambivalence because you've got the dragon who is associated with the devil, but it's also this idea of, the healing serpent, which is associated with Christ, and then the saints are associated with becoming like Christ. So there's some sense in which we become the healing snake. You see there's kind of that's this ambivalence and sometimes the discomfort that the image can cause. Not to mention people don't like snakes. Therefore, they don't like dragons because there's not a particular difference, with or without wings. The idea is kind of what is the image doing in the story. So you had questions? Or anything you want to talk about up to this point?
Yeah, so this is just before we go into the next section, so this is still like all biblical mentions.
Yeah, we can do biblical mentions.
So how does this tie in with like the thought of leftover dragons or goodness, total brain fart. Leftover dragons were dinosaurs and mentions of those in the Bible. Things like that.
Oh, okay. So you want to be one of those crazy people.
Yeah.
Wink. All right. I'm saying wink in case you're listening to the audio only. Wink. No, so it's interesting because you might ask yourself, like, why did the dragon imagery emerge all over the world?
Mm-hmm.
Well, one possible explanation is that somebody might have happened upon some giant bone or a huge skull or something that we might call a fossil. And I don't know if this is right. It's just one possible explanation. In various places, and they saw the scale of this thing and thought that this is a giant lizard thing or something like that, you know. It's so, or even a giant bird thing, right? Because this is another thing, right? The dinosaurs, okay, this might blow your mind. Dinosaurs are hybrids between reptiles and birds, right? That's what science is telling you right now. So the image of the dragon and what a dinosaur was, at least the ones that had feathers, are the same thing, you know? So there is already.
I think there's a theory there too of like birds. Fossils don't stick around, I don't think. There's something about this, like their bones are so brittle.
Yeah.
So
they're hollow.
The theory was the reason why there's no fossils of dragons is because they were like birds. And,
interesting.
It just didn't stick around. If I remember right, something like that.
Well, and it is kind of interesting if you go to like look at an old manuscript, you know, and perhaps somebody found something that inspired this giant imagery of what this thing might be, and it's not. I tend to lean. I try and be a symbolic thinker, so I tend to lean just that the symbolism is so universally true. It necessitates the image. But if you were to find something like that, and you were to envision a dragon being this sort of, you know, winged thing that looks like a snake or a lizard or something like that, and then you were to look at what dinosaurs are being said to look like now with the feathers and different stuff like that, then you would put both of those things then in like the margins of a medieval manuscript and they would look the same. So that's kind of interesting that happened. Is that like a coincidence, or is it just another instance of us treating ancient and medieval people like they were dumb and they weren't dumb? Hard to say, right? So if you say dragon and you say dinosaur, I hear those as the same thing typically, right? Especially the feathered ones. All the pieces are still there.
Okay.
You know, kind of weird, right? So I don't know. I don't know that anybody knows, and that's the kind of thing where you can see myth and symbol merge with science and history, and those things kind of come back together. You see that all the time. But we just have a real penchant since like the 19th century to try and like subdivide things, categorize them, give them names, which I kind of associate that with like kind of a modern or like a German philosophical or even French like philosophical like urge to go through and do these like categorizations. That's part of the Age of Reason and the Enlightenment and the rise of nationalism and all that stuff being connected. So people, I think we grow up in like a cultural milieu of like separation, so that I can't think of a dragon and I can't think of a dinosaur as the same thing because of that subdivision of things out into categories and the urge to say that like myth is just superstition or it's just a fairy tale, and to dismiss an entire way of thinking that's actually a lot older, that includes a lot of the benefits of scientific thinking. It's just if I take a scientific approach, I get to shed all of the morals and tradition along with it. But then you read The Comfort Crisis, and he's really honest about going to talk to, you know, some of the older people or making references to Moses or things in the book or Christ, and kind of saying that wisdom or that common sense or that tradition was there. It was scientifically validated by this study, right? So if you happen to, that happens a lot. There's a lot of things that we do to kind of climb up the mountain, and then like theologians have been sitting there for centuries already thinking about this, you know. So what you brought up made me think of all of that.
Interesting.
You know? Yeah. I think that's partly because theology deals in like absolutes. You know, it deals in like, no kidding, if God exists, like what are things actually like?
I just triggered Star Wars brain.
Yeah.
The whole like, you know, Siths only dealing that.
Yeah, well, and there's a sense that the idea that like there's a lot of gray area, and we call this the pastoral spot, right? Like this is a pastoral concern between a priest and his flock and this specific person, right? That's the gray area. Some people hate that, the pastoral element, because like Pope Francis, for example, very pastoral pope in the sense that he wasn't super precise all the time, or necessarily easy to follow. And some people say that was translation. I don't really know, but the idea is there's a lot of people who hated that because it was like, well, what is it? Like, just give me black and white,
Yeah.
And he didn't like to do that. And I tend to kind of just take the side that it probably wasn't his role to do that, because we've had John Paul II was a philosopher pope, and of course Benedict XVI was a theologian pope, very precise, in their use of language, because those two disciplines demand it. They just were those kinds of folks.
Yeah.
But then, Siths only dealing in absolutes probably is a knee-jerk reaction to, like, claims on morality, right? Like, one thing that people wouldn't want to, in the contemporary pluralistic society, say is that if God is a way, then that is the way that we ought to be. You don't want to say that. So if you make a claim like that in a pluralistic society, you would be more aligned with the Sith, right? To people who have their notion of freedom.
Yeah.
Right. And then the people on the kind of Christian side of that would basically say, well, you're not really free. You're a slave to your passion. You've never confronted it, and you are hooked by it, whether it's alcoholic, sex addict, porn addict, whatever. You think that you're free because you're getting to do those things and trying not to feel ashamed or bad, but we just happen to know that stuff's bad for you in your brain anyway. And it just doesn't really match up. The morality that you find in the old traditions in the West, especially, it tends to get validated by scientific research more than not. Right? Like, you're rerouting your brain pathway by masturbating all the time, for example. That's not good. Right? You treat people differently. There's negative consequences. So it's like, it doesn't hurt anybody. It hurts everybody, right? Which kind of gets into the, Fyodor Dostoevsky and the brothers Karamazov, which is a whole huge 800-page book, but we don't have to get into that. But the main idea there is your sin does affect everybody else because we're all in the same pool. It's the butterfly effect, spiritually, kind of idea. So, yeah, it definitely does affect everybody, which is a super tangent.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So, at what point, when are we going to transition to the, like, Western modern, or not modern, but like the Western view of what a dragon is? Like medieval stuff.
Yeah, we can start talking about that. That'd be next. Okay. And there's really only a couple. I'm only going to look at two examples because they're the main examples. So we can talk about that right now. Okay. So the idea of the dragon kind of tying back to the kind of Tiamat, into the Greek image, into the golden apple hoard, going on to like just hoarded gold, really gets developed into like the Beowulf dragon and Fafnir, which is the dragon from like the what becomes the ring cycle. And it's escaping me right now what the name of it is, which is sad because I just spent a lot of time thinking about it. It's the Volsunga Saga is the term. Sorry, Volsunga Saga, and that's where Fafnir comes from. So that dragon ends up showing up in lots of popular media. Fafnir's in like Final Fantasy games as a reference and stuff like that. You see all that. So the idea at this point is, as the dragon develops into literature, you have this idea kind of emerges that the dragon is not just this otherworldly symbol. The dragon is also you, and if you allow yourself to kind of coil around what you're guarding, cut off the flow of that thing, right? Because it's always some life-giving thing, water, gold, something that you need for thriving. And if you coil around that blessing, keep it all for yourself, then you've become sort of this greed demon creature, right? And that kind of ties to the dragon being Satan, and Satan having some sense of, pride or desire to be God, or something that he was kind of trying to covet, right?
Yeah.
So that kind of gets this idea, the Jungian idea, Carl Jung, like the secular. This is, again, like the tradition that Jordan Peterson picks up, but the dragon is like this destructive greed and possessive archetype in the West.
Okay.
So in Beowulf, and then in other kind of tangential myth, Nordic myth like Fafnir, the dragon is the hoarder of rings, goblets, armor. And Beowulf's dragon, whenever there's like a single golden cup gets taken, the thing just totally loses it, right? That's like part of what precipitates into the final battle between Beowulf and the dragon. So the dragon is kind of the mock king, right? So a good king would have a gift economy set up, right? They would flow, they would have all the land was theirs, all the wealth was theirs, but they would set people over portions of it, like the idea of dukes and earls and things like that. And so in that way, the king gives gifts. And so when we dive into some of our medieval, like King Arthur type stuff, you'll have Arthur giving gifts to the various knights, or knights giving gifts to each other, because this idea of this loop of gift giving is all tying each other together in a real economic sense and in a heroic sense and all that. So the Beowulf dragon is literally this, there's like this story interleaved in Beowulf of like a person of old who kind of holds himself up with gold, this old king, and being holed up with the gold, like at the fall of his kind of like civilization, makes him the dragon. So it is a person from a prior age that becomes this dragon. Fafnir is very similar. It's a man who becomes a dragon because he does not share this cursed treasure, right? And the story of Fafnir is probably the dragon slaying, like the parent of all the dragon slaying stories that we come to know. Smaug and the Lord of the Rings, the dragon sitting on the gold. The hero of the Norse story is, and the Germanic story, there's different versions of the same story, is Sigurd. And Sigurd uses his cunning to defeat Fafnir by laying down in a crack on the ground with a sword. And as the dragon kind of slithers over, he just sticks the sword up and guts it. And it gets rained on by dragon blood and guts, which is really important because Sigurd becomes like this mythological level of like hybrid hero, like invincible, like Achilles type guy from the dragon blood in the stories. Hard skin, only has a certain weak point where the blood didn't get. That kind of idea is in a lot of these stories. And Sigurd then becomes super wealthy because he gets the dragon hoard by killing Fafnir.
Okay.
But Fafnir, was a guy. So this goes back to the idea, I think it was C.S. Lewis that wrote about dragons don't hatch from eggs, right? They hatch from men on gold is the idea. Dragons are men. They're not born out of some dragon egg.
Interesting.
And so that's probably one of the bigger misconceptions of how we envision dragons now, is there's always some kind of like reproductive action that dragons participate in, and they have eggs, and there's baby dragons, and we kind of think of them like that within the Dungeons and Dragons-ified mythos. But that's not the main idea. A dragon is a person, or was a person, and they lost that, which is a good giant tie-in, because that's the idea. A giant was a person, but they were begot in such a way that they became demonized instead of sanctified. So We'll talk more about that, but this is where they kind of overlap.
Let's see.
Yeah. So this idea about like the dragon growing out of somebody who dart on the press of gold, or somebody who pounces on wealth so that they can try and find it, lunge at the chance of gain. You know, they have to have the gold the instant it appears. Once they have it, they have to hoard it. It's theirs. So it's not just having lots of wealth, but it's like this impulsive, grabby action that turns into greed, that makes somebody a dragon.
I see.